Senator Molan is predicting or worried that we are, if not heading towards war, already in one. Welcome back to Outsiders, Jim. How are you, Senator?
Rowan, I'm very, very well, but how depressing a world we're in at the moment, where we've got to, in order to get away from Black Lives Matter and COVID, we've got to talk about
China.
Conflict across the world.
Just very quickly before that, Happy Father's Day, Jim. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you very much.
Tell us, you've got an article in next week's Daily Telegraph about this. Tell us your basic premise on China.
The basic premise is that China doesn't see a difference between what the Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence refer to as a grey zone conflict, as assertiveness or aggression or conflict and war. And we are well and truly, if we look at the symptoms of what's going on in relation to the theft of international, the theft of intellectual property, cyber attacks, actual aggression, ignoring the rule of law, we are in a situation which is well and truly leading down the road towards conflict and war. Now, this government has come out with an excellent strategic update and $270 billion, which goes towards, over the next 10 years, making the ADF ready for some form of conflict. I'm not too sure exactly what form of conflict. But, Rowan, the question I keep asking myself is that if we as a government believe that the Australian Defence Force needs $270 billion, what does the rest of the nation need in order to prepare for the implied conflict in our strategic update? And Rowan, there are two things that I think we can do. The first thing is that we must come out with an overall strategy, not just for the Australian Defence Force, but for the nation as a whole. And that strategy could feed into coming out of COVID very, very well, because it's all about sovereignty and self-reliance. And the second thing is that I think that there is a role for the Parliament to oversee what our strategy is. As Linda Reynolds and I did a report last week from the Defence Subcommittee in Parliament, last year from the Defence Subcommittee in Parliament, in order to create a real committee, not a committee which has no access to classified documentation, a committee of your representatives, very similar to the Intelligence and Security Committee, which oversees the strategy.
James.
Are we in a situation here, Senator, where we are potentially in more of a Cold War than we realize, and China is, or Beijing is trying to, through their United Work Front, through their intellectual property theft, through things they do at our universities, essentially trying to box us in a way that rather than get into a hot conflict down the road, we're unable to respond to the changing geostrategic arena that they are trying to create, and we will wind up having to live with it if we're not careful.
Yes, I believe we are, and I believe that's going on all over the world. And if you can attack the institutions of a nation, such as the validity of political parties, your High Court, the manufacturing capability of a nation, then you may be able to achieve without conflict everything that you want to achieve. And I do feel that the primary aim of China is to maintain the authoritarian government within China, but then they need to do that through becoming the predominant power, at least in this region, if not throughout the world. And, James, we keep looking at China and saying, you know, is this a threat to us or not? It wouldn't matter if the United States still had the power it's had since from 1945 up until the end of the Cold War. But they no longer have that power, and I continually make the case to show that the United States military power has fallen by a half, or at least a third, possibly a half. Therefore, we can't sit back and say, well, of course, the United States will come across the horizon and save us all. We must plan to be on our own. We must plan to maintain our sovereignty, and the way to do that is through self-reliance.
Absolutely. Very quickly, Rita.
Well, how do we combat the tactic that China uses so well, which is economic coercion? They're an economic superpower. How do we fight against that?
Well, in my view, Rita, I think we should keep trading with China for as long as we possibly can. But part of that trading with China must be to make us strong. I mean, I acknowledge China's right and China's achievements in bringing most of its population out of poverty, that it has a major place in the world. But it must have that place only on the basis of not threatening its neighbours, and that's what it's doing at the moment. And the way to do it, Rita, is very, very simple. We must be strong enough to deter attacks on places like Australia or its neighbours, and our obligation is to be strong enough to do that. We can't stop a war between China and the United States, but we can stop and we can deter a collateral attack on this nation in some form going into the future.
Senator James Molan, Senator Jim Molan, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders. Terrific insights there, and you can read them in the Daily Telegraph next week. Senator, as I said, happy Father's Day, and thanks for coming on Outsiders.
Thanks, Outsiders. Thank you very, very much.